thing, whatever it is. We, it's great. We've got an acclaimed author with us. We've got Paro Anand from all the way from India, or if you're in India, down the road, um, and, um, and she's launching her new novel, a new book, and it's yeah. Hold it up, Paro. Hold it up. That's so I can get the title right. I can remember the title. It is, and I'm looking forward to this. It's Nomad's Land, and she'll be presumably reading excerpts, talking about the book, and we can ask her questions. It would be really so. If you're watching on something else, if you want to ask her a question, if you just come onto the site and scroll down, and you'll see, come onto worldstorytellingcafe.com, and you'll see a gold join meeting button. You just press that, and if you've got Zoom, that takes you straight in, and you will have a chance to talk to Parrot at the end of the program. So, and more importantly, she can answer where you can go and find the book. Right. Anyway, enough of this introduction. Um, Without further ado, welcome, Paro.
Thank you, John, and thank you, World Storytelling Cafe, for having me back again for my third trip to the cafe, and this time with a brand new book, Nomad's Land, which is a book, it's a novel that's taken me about 3 years to write, but even longer in terms of thinking about it. The idea first came to me when I was working with a group of nomadic children who had been put into a school, and they were children of poachers, actually, who are nomadic, and they go from forest to forest, and they're poachers, so they are criminals, but at the same time they're so dispossessed, and this is what they have been doing for generations. And the children were not being accepted into any schools because children don't belong anywhere or to anyone. And so they were, um, one of the parents said to me, she said, "We want to buy land. We want to settle down. We don't want to be nomads anymore." And of course, in Romania, we have a very strong connect with nomadic people and gypsies. But these were people who didn't want to be nomads anymore. They wanted to be um, settled people leading a regular life. But nobody would give them land to buy. It was not an option for them, because they were considered criminals, as with gypsies, right? With gypsies also, people don't want the gypsies around because they say, oh, they're thieves and they are troublemakers. And that's what got me thinking that if nomads don't belong to me, who do they belong to? If they don't own land, where are their roots? Where do they set down roots? So that started a long time ago, the thinking around this book. And then the book sort of became more and more urgent as time went on, as we've all been experiencing through media, newspapers, television, social media, the horrific driving out of whole groups of people in every country. The way that one group decides this group must be toughed out, no matter how violently, and they are thrown out. And where do they go? Because again, nobody wants them. Those images of children on the beaches, when the boats of illegal immigrants coming in. Yes, they are illegal, and I'm not saying, flood every country with whoever. But where do they go if they're being driven out? So that was the kind of question that drove the book. So here it is. Nomad's land, and I have dedicated it to both my fathers because they had a very strong sense of roots and belonging. Mountain girls, mountain girls, children of forever skies and endless horizons. They are fed on yesterday's dreams and stories, told and endlessly retold. These dreams color their thoughts, guide their paths, even though these dreams are not their own. For their own dreams have not been fed by the memories of homelands and yesterdays that they have never seen, the futures of what could have and should have been, but never will be. These girls, because they are young, they dream of living here, today, in the now. Their dreams are made up of the fight with a friend, the food they really wanted to eat, the film they dreamt of acting in, the boy they really wanted to talk to. Their dreams are not of the worlds that their families have left behind. These were girls of forever skies and snow-clad mountains, yes, but that was a long time ago. So they've been driven out and um, they don't belong where they once belonged, but their families hark back to that time. So there are two girls, Shana, who belongs to the Kashmiri Pandits who were living in the northern part of India, and they belonged to the wrong religion and they were driven out. Um, so her name is Shana, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the second girl in a moment. Shana protested sometimes. We can't live in mourning forever. But her words were met with silent disapproval. Or her mother's favorite line, you'll never understand. And Shana wanted to rage back. Yes, you're right. I will never understand. How can I? So why do you expect me to? But she didn't. She didn't say it out loud. She knew she didn't have to. She knew her mother was going to be in mourning forever. In school, back home, more and more desks began to empty in every classroom. Shana, for the first time, began to feel that she was different. The lines, once invisible, began to show up and harden. And Huma, one of Shana's very best friends, repeated words over and over and over again. Nothing will happen to you. You're one of us. You're one of us. We'll never let anything happen. And there were moments, though, when Shana didn't feel like one of us. She felt like them, the leaving them, those who were being forced to go. And although even her father would say, nothing will happen, we will be protected by our friends, we and they belong together. But then something did happen. So suddenly, like smoke, a wisp that rises and floats away, taking its very presence with it. Shana hoped that it was her father's spirit that rose straight up into the skies. She hoped that he had not suffered too much when he went up in smoke along with his shop when the grenade was thrown. She hoped that her father's soul had quickly found a new body, a peaceful body in a peaceful place where bombs and grenades did not make up the background orchestra. She hoped because she needed to hope. There was the rush of leaving, a rush of wailing. There was a fear of leaving and a fear of being left behind. But Shana did not weep. There weren't too many friends to say goodbye to. Most of them had already left, and those who were still here were never going to leave. They would take over her house. They would take over what was left of her life so far. And they weren't friends anymore. At least they weren't friends now, though they had been once. Friendships had been split down the middle like curdled milk. You were either on one side or another. You could not be on both. No one was. No one can be on two sides. Shana raged at the injustice that one side could stay and the other must leave. Who were they to decide that it was her side that must go? But she held her tongue as she held on to the little bundle of her father's clothes and seethed silently in her heart. She thought she saw Huma, her best friend, racing down the slope towards the bus stop. Shana's first instinct was to shout out a hello, or at least a goodbye. But she turned away. As far as she was concerned, Huma was a friend no more. Their friendship had died along with her father. Her father had died. Shana shut her eyes tight to stop the hot tears falling. This cursed place did not deserve her tears. As the bus turned the final bend at the Banihal Pass, a wail went up in the bus. They were homeless refugees now. It had been decided who could stay and who must leave. And they had landed on the wrong side, the side of leaving. And then I'll move on to Pema's story. Now, for the second story that I wanted, there were so many, as I researched, there were so many threads and so many stories of displaced people. And I didn't know which one to choose. Sadly, I was spoilt for choice. There are so many people who have been displaced and driven out. So who should I choose? Whose story should I tell? Instead, what I did was I pulled threads from many of the stories and I wove them into one imaginary people called the Khushavans. The Khushavans live in my mind, but honestly, they live across the globe. Pema belongs to the Khushavan tribe who lives in the far north of India, beyond India, in the high Himalayan plateaus, the forever skies, the snow-clad mountains. And she has a very beloved grandmother who she adores, and I can tell you, I made up the Khushavans, I made up their language, their food, their clothes, their beliefs. And there's one particular belief that's pivotal to the book. And Pema is very, very close to her grandmother, who she calls Mola. Mola in the Kushavan language is grandmother. Then late one night, as Pema sat up, rubbing her grandma's chest with balm, inhaling the medicated steam that had now become a permanent fixture in their room, she saw Mola struggling to say something. Grandma hugged her favorite grandchild and whispered hoarsely, "I'm standing at the gate, but who will help me cross?" Pema thought that her grandmother may be slowly losing her grip on reality. It frightened her to think that her dearest friend was unraveling before her eyes, within her arms. "You're not standing at any gate, silly," she tried to reassure her grandma. "You're right here, within the safety of my arms, in your own room, in your own home. Oh, my child, this will never be home. My time has come. I'm standing at the gate, and you've taken me all the way, but I need your help to cross over. Pema tried to dissuade her Mola, thinking that the words were escaping from a flailing mind. But with an effort, Grandma pulled herself straight up. Although her eyes were milky with age and medication, she said in a voice that was clearer and firmer than it had been in a long time, Pema, she said, pinning her with steel in her iron grip. Pema, now listen very, very carefully. My time is very near. But our people, we have our ways. When we are born, we're born with a certain number of breaths, and we must breathe our quota until we have only one left. And with that one last breath, we cross over and life leaves. I don't know why I was born with so many, many, many breaths. More than my son, even. Pema nodded. She knew about her uncle, who had died when the family was fleeing, escaping to safety so many years ago. Mola had told her a lot about him, a laughing child, a rosy cheeked apple of her eye. She had also been told that she, Pema, reminded her grandma of him. She knew it was one of the many reasons that they shared a very special bond. But tonight, despite her struggles, Mola's grip on Pema's shoulder was tight. Her eyes were clear. Pema, in our old ways, we have a custom, the custom of breath takers. The word breath takers sent a shudder down Pema's spine. She looked down, but her grandmother shook her again. Pema, Pema, you have to listen to me, please. I need your help. Pema remembered the promise that she had made to her grandma. If she ever needed help, Mola would come to her. And she knew that the Kushavans kept their word. She knew that she would have to keep hers. And I'm jumping ahead now to the breathtaking ceremony. But it's not Pema who can perform it because of certain rules of that particular ceremony. It's Shana, who has nothing to do with Mola. She has just met Pema, but she gets chosen to be the Druyosan, or the breath taker. And this is the breathtaking ceremony. Shana kneels on a cushion on the ground. She gently taps the yak-tail wisp just above Mola's chest and repeats the words that must be said for every breath. Sans ko mayu leaf is long and drawn out, and she places her left hand on Mola's chest to feel the heartbeat. Mola exhales as long and as deep as she can manage. As the rooster feathers flutter, Shana gives the yak tail a flick and turn. It seems too simple. How could something be that is so important be this easy and simple and quick and smooth? Again, the same doubts distract Shana and stay her hand. Mola opens her eyes, looking deep into Shana's. The girl shakes off her thoughts that visit her brain like unwanted, uninvited guests. Debek Dan, who taught her how to do this, has taught her deep, deep meditation, the laying of hands, the winding. She breathes in, exhales, letting distractions exit from her breath. She closes her eyes, keeping only Mola's face in her consciousness. Sans komayu leaf. Sans komayu leaf. Sans komayu leaf. Over and over and over, until the rest of the room and the world dissolve, and only the objects of release and Mola are left. There are people sitting in the room. Pema, of course, sitting near Mola's feet. Pema's mother sitting near her mother's head, and Pema's father near the door. Shana slips back into the soft rhythm of the words, Sans koma you leaf. Sans koma you leaf. Sans koma you leaf. Exhale, wind, exhale, wind. The rhythm of the words hypnotizes those around. Shana feels the room start to fill up. Others have entered, and as they do, Mola's breath flows easier, softer. Shana is gently rocking to the music that comes from the words. Sans komayu, leaf. Her hand turns, the rooster feathers blow gently on the exhaled breath. Sans komayu, leaf. But as she watches, the length and strength of the breaths decrease, each one a little weaker, softer than the last. The rooster feathers hardly moving when the dying breath touches them. The heart under her hand slows, weakens. Mola's face relaxes, the deep wrinkles absorbed back into smoother skin. It's like she's getting younger with every exhaled breath. Sans komayu, leaf. Pema is repeating the words within herself. This is not frightening. It's soft and peaceful. Mola hasn't been coughing for a while now. Shana slows the pace of her chant, matching grandma's breath for breath for breath. Chant, exhale, turn. A weight lifts from her grandma. Her lips turn into a slight smile. Her eyes flicker open, and there's a light in them. The milkiness has gone. She looks one by one to her daughter, her granddaughter. Her finger indicates, calling them closer. As they bend towards her, she kisses them on their foreheads and then indicates that they must leave. They are crying, reluctant to leave the room. Mola whispers to Shana, barely audible, their tears are keeping me. Their love binds me. They must leave so I can. Shana indicates to Pema and her mother that they need to leave the room. They bow to Mola one last time, kiss her feet, and go. Shana waits and lifts the yak tail whisk to resume. The older woman looks around the room one last time. A look of such love, such peace. Her gaze comes back to rest on Shana, the love sweeping over the young girl. I am ready, she whispers. I am almost there, Dhruyo-san. I'm almost there. Shana nods, understanding. Sans komayu, leaf. Sans komayu, leaf. Thank you. are the last words that come from Mola. Shana looks up at last. She is surprised to see just Pema and her mother kneeling on either side of the bed. Where's everyone gone? She asks. But no one has been there, just Shana. When the end finally came, mother and daughter had just come back in. Awed, Shana whispers, so many people came. They came to take her. Pema looked up at her friend and was about to say that no one had come, but then realized that it wasn't people who had come for her precious Mola. Well, not exactly people. A shiver went down her spine. The room felt strange, but not in a frightening way. Shana wept then, tears for a woman that she had never known, but now would never forget. She was now bound to her. The three wept silently for a while before Pema's father came and put his hand on Shana's shoulder. He helped her get up and held her steady as her legs had gone numb from kneeling so long. He then did a very strange thing. He bent low and lay before her, touching her feet. Shana almost recoiled in her surprise. No, he said, looking up. You are a true Dryosan, a rare breath taker. You are one of us. Nomad's Land. Do read it. It is available on Amazon. It is available on the publisher's website, speakingtiger.in. If you're in India, you can get it there. Amazon does have it. It would be great if you could read the book. I would love for that to happen. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Paro. I just think I just think it's a really important book for the times. So thank you.
Thank you. You know, when I was finally writing the last few chapters, the COVID had happened, the lockdown had happened, and many countries, including India, witnessed the fleeing of migrants because the city had turned its back on those who had held the city up but were now no longer needed. And they were fleeing and continue to flee because they had nowhere to go and no way to earn a living. And so I started the book 3 years ago, but as I said, as I was writing it, it became more and more urgent, and the last few chapters were really very urgent.
Thank you. Thank you. Lekha, were you going to ask something? I just
No, thank you, Paro. Only you can tell the story the way you do. You had all of us in all moist-eyed and sitting on the edge of my chair. But no, I guess my question has been answered. That I was going to ask you whether this last few months of the movement of people uh, had also been part of this tale or had influenced you. But it is a
Yeah.
fabulous book. It's absolutely so moving, and thank you for telling it the way you do. And I
Thank
shall
you,
look
Lekha.
forward
Thank
to
you.
getting it and have you one day again telling us the stories again. Thank you, Cafe, for hosting Paru and being
well,
able to hear
I'm
her.
hoping, and it's just an idea, that in January we could I'd love to do. I'd love to sort of do a Wednesday evening in UK. We have a 6 o'clock program, which is probably quite late in India, probably about 11:30 or something. But I'd love you to do a sort of serialized thing for
Mhm.
over if you want to, but it would just be. I just think it's a really important book, and people should hear it, and and it might bring in a few more book sales, but more important, which from your point of view is really important, but from I just think it's such a relevant book for these times. I'd
Yeah.
I'd I'd love to hit a serialized version, but we'll talk about that.
Yes, I would love to. You know, John, just to share a very interesting thing, many years ago, in the mid 90s, maybe, or earlier than that, maybe, early 90s, I was on a tour of the UK telling stories. And what I was so surprised at was the number of people at every single session. Somebody would ask me, it's a really nice story, but is it an Indian story? And I would say, well, what's an Indian story? I said, well, I've written it and I'm Indian. So yes, they're Indian stories. And they said, it doesn't sound like an Indian story. So I said, what should an Indian story sound like? And they said, yeah, the snake charmers and
No.
magic and flying carpets and things like that. And so at one place, it was in a library, and I picked out what I knew was a British book, and I held it up and said, "Is this?" It was a contemporary one about teenagers and teen angst and thing, and I said, "Is this a British book?" And they said, "Yeah," and I said, "Doesn't sound like a British book." So they said,
Oh,
what should a British book sound like? And I said, should have knights in shining armor, damsels in distress. I mean, where does this book belong? Doesn't belong there. Yeah, they got it. That just as, I mean, the world moves on.
yes, and the whole idea of cultural purity is a nonsense, anyways.
Yeah.
We're all such a mixture of so many different influences, and yeah, and the stories you tell are so universal.
Thank you. Yeah, that is why I thought I would do the Kashmiri Pandit and the story of the Tibetans who fled when China occupied Tibet. But one, I had this idea of breathtakers, and where did the idea of breathtakers come? Was actually at a very painful moment of my life, was when my mother was really struggling and she really wanted to leave, but she couldn't. She had breaths left within her, and her body fought for every breath. And I thought, isn't there any way to make this thing easier? And I thought of the breath takers. So the Tibetans, of course, didn't have it. Of course, nobody had it because it only existed here. Um, so which is why I thought it should not be one people's story because it is so universal.
And I think that's what makes it all the more powerful. I mean, if you ever visit us on a Tuesday night, and if anyone has any young people that would like to tell stories, we do Young International Tellers
Yes.
at 5 o'clock. We do it a little earlier, at 5 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time. So 10:30 where
Mm-hmm.
you are, and we have Young International Tellers, and the most we're getting a lot of children or a lot of young teenagers from Gaza.
Oh,
And as you were doing the introduction to the book, I thought of and that sort of exuberance and spirit that stays with them. I mean, we had them after they've all told their stories. We say, "Does anyone want to do anything?" And they sing. And there was one young girl saying, "I have a dream." I
mm,
mean, they were doing modern pop songs, again, not fitting into anyone's,
yeah.
fitting into themselves, not what anyone else thinks what they should be doing. And it was, but it was. And when you were talking, when earlier earlier on the thing where you were talking about the character that has you know, that dreams of being the film star, thinking of this, thinking of that. I thought I thought these kids in Gaza. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. With I also had the experience in Kashmir of both sides of the Kashmiri story. And what did the children want is to um, uh, be famous, be successful. But they were in a place of conflict, and these were all orphans who couldn't see their own futures. Their future was so murky. And so many of them actually said to me, tell our stories for us. And I said, you tell your stories. They said, no, but when you tell the story, it goes out into the world. Tell our stories for us. So I think it's really important to represent young people and their untold stories, because it's important for young people to find themselves in books, and equally important for to find a completely other person and have the empathy for that person as well.
ah, I don't. It's just well, I sometimes get incredibly enthusiastic about stuff, and I must confess today, you know, there's I mean, I've loved your writing and what I've heard of it in your stories, but this one just sort of goes, you know, off the planet in terms of current importance. And I think, but novels, you know, and stories do that. That is the power of stories.
Yeah.
And you know, that because they have the power to have people realize things, you know, realize things they didn't think of before.
Yeah, exactly. So also very important to find yourself, because then you don't feel that alone. But that moment of discovery of a completely other life, especially for young people, I find very powerful. And I can tell you that every time because I work a lot with young people, and my last question to them is always, what stories do you want me to write, or what stories do you think there should be for young people? And while the teachers or parents are around, they'll give safe answers. But there are always two or three who come sort of find me at the end and give the kind of suggestions which, I don't know, maybe I couldn't write. Possibly they wouldn't get published or go past a school gate. But these are the concerns of young people, you know, sexuality. And one thing very disturbing I find in children's literature, at least in India, I can't say for everywhere, that we find it, the gatekeepers, that's the schools, parents, um, are much looser with the door or with the issue of hate and violence than they are about love and sex. Love and sex is more taboo than hate and violence, and I can't wrap my head around that.
I remember talking to someone who had been a film censor for, and he was talking about different countries, and he was talking about, you know, that in Sweden they found real difficulty with the fact that in Britain at that time it was very restrictive on sex and love, whereas there, you know, you can put as much gore as you like on and violence
Yes,
on. Well, whereas Sweden it was the reverse,
it
and
was the
so they put an age limit on ET, because there was there was an upsetting scene in ET. So I think they put a 12-year-old limit in Sweden on ET, and
Oh,
it's interesting the different concepts of what should be.
yes.
what should be censored,
Yeah.
and of course, as writers, we tend to think, what part of our job is to kick down those doors.
Yeah. Yep. But interestingly, though, there's my book called The Other, also published by Speaking Tiger, who is an very brave Indian publisher. And Anthony Horowitz said about this book, as well as No Guns at My Son's Funeral, that he said, these books probably would not get published in Britain, but they
No,
are published in India. And I think that's incredible, because we always think of ourselves as being more conservative, but apparently this is what Anthony Horowitz said, and he should know.
no, he should. He's right. He's right. It's just, that it's like, well, there's a mixture of commercial concerns, and people like to, especially with books for young people, avoid controversy.
Yeah.
So there's some very self-conscious books that deal with issues, but that's not a novel. That's like a pamphlet. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
with books like yours that delve deeply, it's like I think sometimes people think it's dangerous to go below the surface, and in some ways it is. It's radical to go below the surface. But I think, Anthony's, we like to think of ourselves as a liberal country here, but I think if you scratch the surface, is absolutely right. It's just, whether it's commerce or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, but you look at how violent Hunger Games was. I mean, I was like really physically sick at some moments in Hunger Games. I found it so violent. But I mean, I write violence myself. I've written about terrorist violence, I've written about death, but I'm never glorifying it in the way I found that Hunger Games, I couldn't stomach, literally. But it's still, I look at how successful. And I think that's the other thing, that when you're writing or telling stories for younger people, my thumb rule is don't underestimate them.
Absolutely. Well, it's slightly outside you, but I remember going to a school in the north of England, and as a storyteller, and poet, both, and it was the majority of children in that classroom were probably Bangladesh, I think, and I did it. I did the story, and the teachers turned around afterwards and said, we didn't realize they could take that they could understand that much language. And I'm saying, that's because you're talking down all the time. You're simplifying everything. Give the children some credit. I think that's changed a bit now, but we do underestimate children all the time.
And if they don't understand, they'll ask.
Absolutely.
Which is why I really believe in an open shelf policy in bookshelves, that let children pick out whatever book they want. And if they find a book too grown up, too adult, they can't comprehend it, they'll put it down and let them do that. There's nothing sacrosanct that once you started a book, you've got to finish it. Let it be. If you didn't get it, you didn't get it.
Yeah. But they tend to do that in bookshops as well. This is for an age group. And that's the other thing with publishers, that they do. Let's get an age group niche. And I kind of, it doesn't. Well, I have feelings about that. Yeah. I have opinions.
Wait, this is the thing, isn't it? That so we've cut children up into little pieces, right? Pre-readers, pre-teens, tweens, young adult, this age to this age, we've given them these strange names. we don't do the same for adults. Why is that? I mean, surely there should be something for people 60 to 80, 80 to 100. Why not?
Yeah.
Our concerns a little different. I mean, when I was 30, I wasn't thinking of what I'm thinking now in my 60s. So,
Yeah. Well, and I'm just that point where I'm reverting to childhood.
and I do want to add one thing uh, about this book. I just wanted to read a little. Um, this is from Chief Seattle's letter when the land was being taken away from the native Indians in America. And then the letter that he wrote to the governor, it's said, right? And this, I always try and start my books with a few lines of a song or poem that embodies what the book is about, kind of frames it. So this is, we know the sap which courses through the trees as we know the blood that courses through our veins. We are part of the earth and it is part of us. And what happens with the Kushavan people in the book is what is happening all around the world is that you have to give up this land that is mothered you and nurtured you. And you're told that now you have to follow this set of rules, as the Kushavans have to now suddenly produce birth certificates and death certificates. They've never had that. They've been a nomadic shepherding people. They've never needed it. And they've lived in peaceful coexistence with the plains people, where they exchange what the other needs. And they're extremely wise, and yet they're driven out. The thing of breathtaking also has been outlawed by those who didn't understand what it was, and it was made illegal because it was thought to be that it's a form of suicide, and suicide is, I mean, it's sort of an assisted death, but the Dryosan, the breath taker, never lays hands on the patient who's dying, on the person who's dying. So it's this sort of one size fits all attitude that is so harmful and so hurtful to so many people, that we really need to rethink this policy of one size fits all.
Yeah, I'm reminded there's a friend of mine, Dan Allen, who's a gypsy Romney playwright. He runs a Romney theatre company in Britain, and he wrote this play, and it's based on the old lady in the play is based on someone he knew as a child, and there's a point where the social worker is trying to sort of interfere with her life, and they're asking for things like birth certificates, and she says, why would I need a birth certificate? I know I was born.
True. Yeah. I know I died. I know. I mean, everybody knows this person died, but why do you need that certificate saying this day, this time, this how, this, I mean, it's just, it just makes life so difficult. But also with this book, one thing is that, as always, I do end on a note of hope and a note of finding roots and setting down new roots. And um, it's quite moving for me as a writer, for me as a storyteller, to replenish my heart, and with that belief that, yeah, there is hope. It doesn't matter how dark and how difficult, there is hope, and children can be the bearers of that hope because they need it and they can do it.
And that's a really we'll finish on that thought, because I love that thought and I think it's really important. And for those that joined us halfway through, we are talking about Paro Anand's new novel, new book, Nomad's Land. And if you want to find it, you can look up for on Amazon. It's published by Tiger.
Speaking,
Bye
by
bye.
Speaking Tiger,
Speaking
uh,
Tiger.
speakingtigerbooks.com. They also have it.
Speakingtigerbooks.com.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's a really powerful story, and it is this week's recommended reading, and probably next week's as well. Paro, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm going to get in touch about the future. I'll probably do one of those Facebook messengers, which is, we can talk to each other around the world by that. So.
Yeah, COVID has taught us a lot.
Yes. So good afternoon or good night, depending on where you are. And thank you for joining us, Lek.